You're listening to In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on the business of advertising, produced weekly by Big Eye. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, VP of Insights at Big Eye, an audience-focused, creative-driven, full-service advertising agency. We're based in Orlando, Florida, but serve clients across the United States and beyond. Thank you for joining us for the last episode of this season and of this year. During the course of 2020, issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion have been front of mind. In November, a century after women first earned the right to vote, America chose Kamala Harris to be the first ever female to hold the office of vice president. The organization See Her, led by the Association of National Advertisers, seeks to improve the accuracy of portrayals of women and girls in US advertising and media. Women have long been underrepresented in the media's depiction of entrepreneurship, yet the number of female entrepreneurs in the US has increased since 2007 by over 30%. And their firms have grown at a rate 1.5 times greater than other small businesses. Female business leaders also tend to begin their entrepreneurial journeys earlier in life than their male counterparts. According to a GuardianFinancial.com survey, 51% of female business owners were under the age of 50 when they launched, compared to 44% of men. The National Association of Women Business Owners reports that there are 9.1 million women-owned businesses nationwide, employing 7.9 million employees and generating $1.4 trillion in sales. So in this episode of In Clear Focus, we're going to revisit conversations with 5 female entrepreneurs who were our guests this year and learn how each of them arrived at the ideas for their own businesses. In June, we spoke to Kristin Wiley, founder and CEO of the influencer marketing agency Statusphere. When did you first realize that you wanted to pursue a career in marketing?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, although it's probably not what most children want to grow up to be when they're little. I actually always wanted to be in marketing. I thought advertisements were actually super cool on TV. I would watch TV just for the ads, and I would even make ads myself. So I knew I always wanted to go into marketing. But of course, when I was little, social media wasn't even a thing. So that evolved over time. But I knew from when I went into college that I wanted to go into advertising and marketing.
So in 2016, you founded Statusphere with a mission of matching consumer brands with influencers. What's your definition of an influencer?
Yeah, my definition of an influencer is anyone who influences a buying decision. I actually quite often talk about how specifically influencer marketing, everyone views it as online, but it's really just word of mouth marketing in the new age. Social networks have allowed real people to build audiences and actually influence outside their sphere of just who they can talk to. So it's been very interesting to see how platforms like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok allow you to go outside of just your little sphere of influence, where it used to be big movie stars that could do that before social media was a thing.
So Kristin, what insight sparked the idea that ultimately became Statusphere?
Yeah, so actually when I was in college, I had a professor who told me the best thing that I could do to actually learn about marketing in general was to start a blog. He said, you'd learn way more than anything you'll learn in my class, is what he said. His name was Jim Hobart. He's actually pretty popular in the Orlando community. He's a photographer, but he was an adjunct professor at the time. He told our whole class that. And that night I went home and I started a blog, and he was so right. I always say that's the best career advice I've ever gotten. I started this blog, had no idea what I was doing. I had to learn how to build a website. I had to learn SEO. I had to learn, photography, really, content. If you look at my first blogs, they were just horrific. But I did learn so much. And that was actually what even spurred me to get my agency jobs. All of my jobs where they saw my blog and they were like, we don't even care about your GPA. You did that. We're hiring you. So I always give him major thank you for that piece of advice. So I did have that experience. And then when I started working at different agencies, I always got thrown into doing influencer marketing because I was the only one that had experience with it. So they were like, oh, you're young, but no one else on our team has really influencer marketing experience. This is 2011, 2012, but our brands are asking for it. So can you help us? So I was in this unique position where I was given a budget. I got to test out other influencer marketing platforms. I was on them as an influencer and as a brand. And that's where I started seeing all these holes where I was like, there just has to be a better way. On the influencer side, I was a food blogger and I would get pitched mattress companies and really strange things that had nothing to do with my blog. And I was like, this is a waste of my time. And why is it this way? And then on the brand side, I was sifting through hundreds, if not thousands of influencers trying to find the right one. And I was like, there just has to be a better way where we can match the two. And that's where the idea was born.
Now, prior to founding Statusphere, had you any interest or experience in entrepreneurship?
I had interest in entrepreneurship, but I didn't think that I would become an entrepreneur. Looking back, when I was younger, I was one of those people who did always have a side hustle where I sold like really random things door to door. I've sold everything from like bows to like purses. I used to like buy stuff from Marshalls and resell them on eBay. So I used to always do those type of like weird entrepreneurial things to make extra money, but I never thought I was going to start a company. So that being said, I started working at one of the agencies locally, and one of their verticals was startups. So I worked in sales in that, and I started interacting with lots of startup founders. And that's when I started, I think, realizing in the back of my head, like, this is something I think I could do. Like I started meeting other female founders and seeing them do it. And I was like, well, I've had this idea for a while. Maybe I should try it.
So from idea to establishing Statusphere, what did that look like?
So I had the idea for Statusphere for a while before starting it. I bought the URL actually like 2 years, probably, or year and a half before ever launching anything. I think that's a story that a lot of entrepreneurs talk about because it just takes so much effort to actually make the jump because, you're so nervous. Like, is this what I should be doing? I have a great job. I actually loved my current job at the agency. So it made it even harder. Like, why would I do this? But the way that it looked was I actually had told my boss at the agency about it, and he was very supportive, which I think is also unheard of. And I thank him a lot for being so supportive because that was a big thing that pushed me. Like, he thinks it's a good idea. Maybe I should try this. And I did on the side. And the way I started was I reached out to a bunch of influencers with a simple landing page that was like the first subscription box for influencers. It was a really ugly landing page with a form on it where you could apply. And I just messaged it to 10 influencers that I personally followed that didn't know me personally. And I woke up the next day and had 12 applications. And I was like, well, maybe this is some good idea.
Kristin leveraged her agency-side knowledge of social media and her experiences as an influencer to identify a gap in the market and then create a solution to satisfy a previously unmet need. If you'd like to hear the full interview with Kristin Wiley, you'll find it on our website with a publication date of June 18th. Over the past 15 years, Holly Capper has made a name for herself in the world of culinary public relations, building on a career that's included cookbook and magazine editing, recipe testing, and food styling. But in 2019, after a personal health crisis had forced her to reevaluate, Holly launched the Culinati podcast with the stated mission of exploring big ideas in the galaxy of gastronomy. We caught up with Holly in October. So what inspired you to launch the Culinati podcast?
Well, it was kind of a roundabout way. I've always had NPR dreams. I've always loved listening to public radio, and particularly the interview shows like Fresh Air. And I often thought about what it would be like to have my own radio show. And as a journalist, I spent a lot of time interviewing people, and truly that was the best part of being a journalist, was being able to get in touch with people, learn about them, and learn about the things that they are passionate about and the cool things that they're doing. And it came to me that most of that stuff that we were talking about wasn't going to make it into the articles that I was writing because that wasn't the subject of the article. So a lot of those amazing interviews and stories were just lost. So they weren't the things that were being covered. And so I was like, there has to be a place for those things because those are the real interesting stories. So I had this idea for a little while, and a friend of mine had a beer podcast. It was a female-focused beer podcast called Pretty Little Pints. And she invited me on the podcast, and it was my very first time doing it. And we were going to talk about Beaujolais Nouveau. It was Thanksgiving time, and she wanted to do a wine podcast and wanted to taste the new Georges Duboeuf Beaujolais Nouveau. And she's, let's talk about it and let's do it on the air. And I said, okay. So I went on it and I had a great time. And after the show was over, she was like, my husband and I bought this domain and we've never done anything with it. But if you would be interested in doing a podcast called The Culinati, we would love for you to record at our studio. They have a really cool studio that's located in their house. They've turned a bedroom that they don't use into a full-on podcast studio. And so people can come in and just record their shows. Instantly, I was interested. And then a couple of months later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Everything that I had been working on as far as creative sort of got pushed to the side. I had to just focus on my full-time job and getting better, of course, going into treatment. So my entire world was going to doctors and getting treatment and trying to maintain my full-time job and that kind of thing. So I had to push everything to the side. So as soon as I was done with active treatment, in December of 2018, I said to myself, okay, I'm going to pick this up. This is something that I really want to do. I need a creative outlet. I want to do something completely different. And so I went full speed ahead. I had the logo in my head already. And so I got in touch with a friend of mine, Tim Eggert, the graphic designer behind the City of Orlando flag. And so as soon as I got the logo, it felt real. And so I learned everything I could. I read everything I could. I listened to other podcasts on how to do podcasts and thought about the people that I wanted to emulate in my shows. My previous life was in magazines. And so I did the same thing that you do in magazines, which is you put together a front of book, you put together a feature well, and then you put together a back of book. And so the intro and all the stuff that we do at the beginning was like the front of book. And then I was like, okay, now I have to have features. And so I would say, okay, who are like the big people in town that I definitely want to have as my first 3 guests? And I chose people who were like very inspiring to me and people who were really interesting and did things in the food world that I thought people would love to hear about and would be a great hook for my first 3 episodes. And then I put together a back of book, which is a little bit more like a wrap up. And then also we do a really cool section called Short Order. And it's just quick association questions that I ask my guests that are really lighthearted and food focused, just so that our audiences can get to know the guests a little bit more on a different level. So that's what inspired me. I've always loved the radio and always loved that medium. I feel like it's a really intimate medium, being in someone's ears, going into their brain, getting them to think about something else. And I feel like there's something really magical about a really good interview. So that was the main inspiration.
Holly, do you monetize your podcast? Do you run paid advertising, special sponsorships, or partnerships with any of the businesses that you highlight?
I don't have any monetization in my show yet. The reality is that I am doing this show to glorify, to showcase, to feature the people who are doing amazing things. And I have not looked to make any money off of this. The money that I hope that is changed hands is for the businesses that I work with. I hope that the 300 people or whomever that listen to each episode, that they go to the restaurant or go to the website that we're talking about, they spend their money there, and it helps my guests do other cool things or continue doing the cool things that they've been doing. The money goes to my guests. That's the intention.
As you heard, Holly found a new creative outlet for her love of interviewing people, and one that helps the restaurateurs she works with attract and connect with new guests. If you'd like to hear more of the interview with Holly Capper, you'll find it on the In Clear Focus page with a publication date of April 24th. Now, if Holly does decide to monetize the Culinati podcast, our next guest will be a great resource. Heather Osgood had been selling advertising for over 20 years on radio, print, and trade show booths, but was so passionate about podcasts that in 2016, she founded True Native Media, a firm dedicated to connecting podcasts with advertisers. Heather was our guest in November. What was the insight that led you to found True Native Media?
I founded True Native Media because I became a bit of a podcast obsessed listener. I sold a trade show production company that I had for about 10 years. And for the first time in my adult life, I had so much time to spend listening to podcasts. And the more I listened to podcasts, the more I consumed all of this audio, I was shocked to find that there were so few ad messages in podcasts. And when we look around the landscape of all of the media out there, what we find over and over again are ad messages. And so it seemed strange to me that podcasts were almost like this island. And while some of the very biggest shows had advertisers, most of the shows that I listened to, which I would classify as mid-level shows, did not have advertisers. So I took a look at the industry and I found that yes, those 1% of top shows were being served by firms that were happy to connect them with advertisers. But then there were all of these essentially hundreds of thousands of impressions that were going unserved without ad messages. And I just felt like there really was a hole in the market and I wanted to help fill that. And given my ad background and my experience as an entrepreneur, I felt that really founding an organization like True Native Media to really help connect those mid-level shows with advertisers was something that was really up my alley and something that I could really contribute. And so that's why I founded the organization.
What services does True Native Media offer?
So True Native Media is a podcast representation firm, which means that we represent podcasts. So currently we work with about 70 different podcasts in the industry, and our role is to connect those podcasts with advertisers. So we work with agencies, we work directly with brands, and go about getting advertisers in any way we can for those podcasts that we serve, as well as the advertisers that we serve. But really our focus is to try and fill the podcasts we represent up with ad messages.
Heather, you're not only involved in the representation of podcasts, but you also produce and host a podcast of your own called the Podcast Advertising Playbook. What topics do you typically cover?
So I created the Podcast Advertising Playbook because I wanted to share with the world. As you can tell by listening to this episode, I could talk about this for hours. There are so many different topics to be covered. And so I started that podcast specifically to talk about the ins and outs. What is dynamic ad insertion and how can that serve you? How can you find podcasts to purchase? When you're looking at creating success, what does that look? How can you track results? What does privacy look like? So we cover all of these important topics. And I would say part of the most fun of producing that show is interviewing other industry experts. So we talk to people from these attribution companies, we talk to other brands, and we see what kind of experience are they having in the podcast ad space? What have they done to perfect the results that they're getting? So it's really meant to be a place where if people are interested in learning more about how to utilize podcast advertising and make it effective, that they can go to the show.
Now, do you think the experience of regularly producing your own podcast helps you relate to the challenges many other podcasters face?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's been great. So I want to say that we're on episode 35. I will be totally transparent in that I have lots of help with the show. So my marketing team is very effective in helping keep me on the straight and narrow. And what I mean by that is actually produce those episodes, because that's one of the hardest parts about a podcast is you have to produce regular episodes. And I think oftentimes when people imagine starting a podcast, they think it sounds like so much fun and it's going to be so easy or it won't take that much time. And realistically, it is a lot of work. And so it's been nice to go through the whole experience alongside the podcaster and really understand and identify what, their needs and concerns firsthand.
Taking advantage of a career hiatus, Heather combined her love of podcast listening with her professional experience in the advertising industry to seize a new opportunity, one which she uses her own podcast to promote. You can find the full interview with Heather Osgood on our website with the publication date of November 13th. Some of the earliest adopters of podcast advertising to acquire new customers were direct-to-consumer brands. DTC has been a recurring topic on In Clear Focus throughout 2020. In October, I discussed the findings of Big Eye's national study of CBD use with Alexandra Maclay. Having worked in marketing leadership roles for Johnson & Johnson, Elizabeth Arden, and Burt's Bees, Alex is now launching her own direct-to-consumer brand in the CBD and supplement space. What first sparked your interest in CBD as an ingredient for beauty and wellness products?
I think my first interest was sparked, quite frankly, on a personal level. Once I found out that my mid-70-year-old father was using CBD on a daily basis, it piqued my interest. And so I quickly started to study up on the benefits of CBD and started to become sort of a connoisseur of taking CBD myself. And from there, really just looked at all the multi-benefits of this new active ingredient and what it could do for the industry that I've been in my whole career in beauty and wellness. And so from there, as I continued my journey in educating myself in this space, I was bridged to large cannabis companies that were looking to develop branded products within the beauty and wellness space. And from there, everything just started to explode.
Are there any special considerations for how products containing CBD designed for application to the skin need to be formulated?
Absolutely. And what we're doing that we think is a little unique and proprietary is that we actually have some technology and some patented delivery systems that are enabling us to formulate in a new and more novel way with the CBD. Mainly, a lot of CBD you're going to see is going to be an oil-based. And which you get, it's problematic if you want to have a water-based formula for any type of skincare products or even vaginal lubricants. It's more natural to be a water-based. And so we have a water-soluble sort of nanotechnology. We also have a delivery system that helps penetrate deeper into the skin that is more efficacious in terms of the delivery method. And so you're going to get faster, better relief, but it's a little more challenging to formulate with because it is a powder and it's an encapsulated powder, and it can at times tweak the formula in terms of the scent or the aesthetics. And so we do have to play around quite carefully with the different aesthetics. It also helps to have a very high quality CBD, but at times a higher quality CBD might have more of that hemp aroma, and it's a little more difficult to formulate away from having that really strong hempy aroma. So there's a lot, it takes a long time and a lot of careful consideration to really design something that you're putting on the skin because you want it to not only feel great, smell great, but work really well.
Lifestyle guru Martha Stewart launched her own CBD wellness line in partnership with a Canadian company, Canopy Growth Corporation. Sold online through Canopy's site, the line includes flavored oils, soft gels, and gummies, apparently inspired by French baked goods, including blood orange cheesecake, berries, and cream tartlets. Sound delicious. Alex, is Martha Stewart's involvement designed to appeal to an affluent female demographic, do you think, or is it more about connecting with boomers?
That's a great question. I think specific to Martha Stewart, her brand, I think, really does span across multiple generations through some of the partnerships and work that she's done with Snoop Dogg. I think there's a boomer appeal. There's certainly a Gen X appeal, which is my generation who grew up listening to Snoop Dogg. So I really think that in general, when these large companies are looking to utilize, whether it's Martha Stewart or Rob Gronkowski or any of the other celebrities, I think it really is about, one, dispelling any myths, making CBD mainstream. And also it's about what size of a megaphone does that give you as a brand. I don't recall the exact number of followers that Martha has, but it's in the millions in social media. And with some of the restrictions that there are placed on advertising for CBD, having a celebrity who can speak to the masses just helps generate that brand awareness, as well as creates a comfort level for people who are kind of curious and want to jump into trying the products. So as it relates to Martha Stewart, they are looking at her to have a broad appeal across different gender bases and different generations.
Inspired by her father's experience with CBD, Alex used her business knowledge of the beauty industry to create an entirely new brand designed to appeal to customers seeking multifunctional benefits from skincare products. You can hear that interview with Alexandra Maclay as part of our podcast episode about Big Eye's national study of CBD use, published on October 16th. Staying with direct-to-consumer brands, in early October, In Clear Focus featured a true pioneer in the DTC space. Olivia Canless is the co-founder and CEO of Meowbox, which she launched back in 2013. Olivia spoke to us from our company's offices in Vancouver. Can you tell us a little more about what Meowbox is?
Of course. So I like to think of Meowbox as monthly deliveries of cat happiness. So it is a box full of themed cat toys and treats that we choose exclusively for our subscribers. And we deliver that monthly or bi-monthly in the subscription model.
Now, back in 2013, when you launched Meowbox, direct-to-consumer wasn't nearly as well established as a business model as it is today. What inspired you to start a subscription box for cat owners?
I was a subscription box customer maybe 2 or 3 years before I thought of the idea of Meowbox. I was a subscriber to cosmetics. So I knew that was something that appealed to me, to my friends, people in a similar demographic as I was. And so I was aware of the concept of subscription boxes, but specifically like the moment where I thought, what, there needs to be a Meowbox in this world was when I started getting targeted on my Facebook for a dog subscription box. And I thought, you know what, instead of just ignoring it, thinking that doesn't apply to me, I don't have a dog, I wondered, because I'm more of a cat person, I wonder if there was a box for cats. And upon my initial research, there wasn't a box that was dedicated just to cat parents.
Clearly the business is successful now, but looking back, do you think being a woman meant that you faced additional challenges as an entrepreneur?
I like to think that everything that I do and that I did to build the company, it's not tied to gender in any way, but I didn't look at my gender as something that was going to hold me back from succeeding. But in reality, there were a few moments where I was reminded that maybe I might be viewed a little bit differently in terms of, male versus female business leaders. And one example that I can think of was I was at a trade show once looking for some new product with my co-founder, who's male. And a handful of times, the brand representatives would initiate the conversation speaking to him instead of me, as if just automatically thinking that he was the one who was the decision maker. And it was just something that I noted. I wasn't like offended or insulted, but it was definitely something that I noticed at the time, and just little things like that. I mean, very easy for me to step in and let them know I was the one who was doing the product selection. So it could have just been like a subconscious behavior of people to expect maybe that it was the male who was in charge of making the decisions.
Now, in the 7 years since you launched Meowbox, have things changed for women interested in starting businesses, do you think?
Yes. So it's a lot more commonly seen, or at least it's apparent to me, that there's more women who are heading businesses. Now, I don't know if that's just because I'm exposed for it. Maybe I have my eye out for that, but I know so many more women-led businesses and female entrepreneurs than I did years ago. Now, it could be the way that the landscape of business is changing, and it's just something that is being more brought to our attention. Maybe women in business are being highlighted more than they used to be, which may in turn encourage more women to want to aspire to be in charge of businesses and turning their ideas into businesses. But definitely from when I started my research into subscription boxes and pet businesses, it was a lot more men leading those industries as opposed to now. And now I just have an endless contact list of colleagues who are women who own businesses.
So, Olivia, what inspires you on a daily basis? Are there any journals, podcasts, or social media accounts that you follow, cat-related or not?
You know what? I have to say, my source of inspiration comes from my fellow female entrepreneurs. I have a small group of female entrepreneurs who I look up to, whose businesses I follow, whose social media I follow. We're in communication for best practices or problem solving, advice, and that kind of thing. And it's really blossomed and become a resource for me that I've come to, rely on and go to as of late. And I guess I didn't really realize how important it was maybe in early years to have that kind of a network of colleagues. But as time goes by, it's just, I don't know, maybe you lose a bit of your ego and are just more open to sharing your challenges with other people, especially people who have maybe dealt with that before, people in a similar business as you. And that's where my inspiration comes from. I see ladies who are running businesses that do certain things better than me or certain things that I've never done before. And I'll ask, how can I do that? How did you reach that? And vice versa. It's the same where there'll be something that I'm doing really well with Meowbox, and they ask me, how did you do that? What tools did you use to reach that? And it's just this feedback loop of all of us sharing and each of us supporting each other and just doing better and better.
Olivia thought about her personal experience as a makeup subscription box customer and saw the opportunity to apply the same business model to delight cat owners like herself. During the full interview, Olivia is very candid about what marketing tactics work and what doesn't work in the DTC space. You'll find it on the InClear Focus page with a publication date of October 9th. I hope you enjoyed this recap of some of the inspiring stories we heard this year from successful female entrepreneurs. My thanks again to all the guests you heard in today's episode: Kristen Wiley, Holly Capper, Heather Osgood, Alexandra McClay, and Olivia Canlas. As always, you'll find links to the resources we discussed on the InClear Focus page at bigeyeagency.com under Insights. Just click on the button marked Podcast. Thank you for listening to this, the final episode of InClear Focus for 2020. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant. We'll be back with a new season of InClear Focus in mid-January. So until then, goodbye.